Before we get into tonight's number 3, I just want to say a few words about the word redeemed, which we use quite a lot in this course. Now, redeemed is a Bible word. There's a difference between the redeeming of my soul and the redeeming of my personality. The redeeming of my soul, the Bible calls justification. And it happens once, it's immediate, and it's free. Jesus died for my sins. When I confess and I put my faith in him, my sins are dealt with once and for all, and it's over. It happened for me when I was 7 years old. But then there's the thing of redeeming my personality. That the Bible calls sanctification. It is lifelong. But meanwhile, there's a lot of work to be done on my personality. It's a really sad thing when you see someone who's been born again, they're a Christian, they've got their ticket to heaven, but somehow Jesus hasn't got deep into the fiber of their personality. Tonight we come to number 3, the achiever. Number 3, the achiever. The illusion of the number 3, this is 9 illusions, the illusion of the number 3 is if only I can be successful and look good, everything will be all right. If only I can be successful and look good, everything will be all right. That is why I'm dressed like I am tonight. Because research was done, of course, in the United States on what people wear and how the audience remembered what they said. And they discovered if you wear a black suit with a pinstripe in it and a tie with a little red in it, it's the most effective of all. Have you noticed anything about particularly American presidential election races? What do they wear without fail? Pinstripe black suit, a black tie with some red in it. Except for one candidate a few years ago by the name of Ross Perot. Does anyone remember Ross Perot? Who deliberately bucked the establishment and ran as an independent. He deliberately wore green suits with brown ties or brown suits with green ties to break the mold. Incredibly, he got 20%, which I think is the highest percentage ever scored by an independent in the history of the United States. He was bucking the system based on image, because image is the big word for a number 3. I must look good. Now, it's quite interesting that a lot of number 3s do look good. They're good-looking people. Friedrich Buechner telling the story of his mother, who was a beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl. And he told how very sadly, as she grew older and began to lose her looks, she kind of fell apart because all her life, just looking good had been enough. It was all that was required for people to love her. And so she wasn't called on to produce anything from within. And when she began to lose it, she began to lose it. And Buechner actually talked about the handicap of being beautiful. And so they often are good looking. If they're men, they often have wonderful hair. They don't go bald very easily. And I did once hear Tony Campolo say, never go to a bald faith healer. Do you think he hasn't tried it on himself? You know, and so he was unsuccessful. Now, how is it that these beautiful people end up being number 3s? I think it probably happens because they have beautiful genes. Their parents were good looking, and their parents were probably 3s and put a lot of store by good looks. And from tiny little girl, everyone would coo over and say, so beautiful. And so she, very, very early, we think by the age of 4, picked up that she would be a number 3. The fear, of course, is failure or looking bad. To them, that's a disaster. I don't want to fail. Fail, I don't know why. Maybe failure was heavily punished when they were young, and they learned very early failure is not allowed. Looking good was obviously exalted. Mostly, I think it was their parents were 3s. They saw how it was done. They saw how they behaved, and they just followed the same way, having these good-looking genes. But there's fear. I knew a number 3 who was a businessman. And I once, in my sermon, said something to the effect that the driving force for businessmen is making money. He came to me afterwards and he said, Andrew, you're wrong. The driving force for businessmen is fear. Fear of failure. And he described how at one stage when he was involved in a very big job, he would throw up in the toilet every morning before he got in his car to go to work. The fear of failure. And guess what? He always wore a pinstripe suit with a black tie and some red in it. The fear of failure. The sin, or the sins of the number 3, are deceit and shallowness. You can see why it happens. The most important thing is how I look. And so if necessary, I'll make myself look good even when it's not actually totally true, when it's not honest. I will put on an outside exterior. I mean, Hollywood is just full of number 3s. You see them all the time. They come onto the Oprah Winfrey show and you just see immediately, there's number 3, straight away. This amazing facade, and yet you discover, when you discover stories, that there's a whole other story, usually of all sorts of broken marriages and failures, but they manage to put on this front. And don't think it's only Hollywood. Do you know that some time ago, the British bureaucracy ran a seminar for civil servants headed acceptable levels of dissimulation? In other words, to what point is it acceptable to tell lies to the public? And they have a seminar on that and how to do it. Of course, Winston Churchill knew all this. He had a saying, I don't believe anything until it's been officially denied. And there is this tendency, because appearance is what counts. And I'll cover up all sorts of stuff. And we saw a real rash in the 90s of televangelists who just suddenly we discovered behind this wonderful preacher was all sorts of rubbish. And it happened to 3 or 4 in a row, and it was actually very damaging to the Christian church, that they could portray this wonderful Christian preacher image, but actually they were consorting with prostitutes and things like that, because they can put on this exterior, and what's going on behind it may not be what's happening. The animal that portrays the number 3 is the chameleon. That is the number 3. They know how to change their appearance to suit the background. And then we come to the country. The country, I've already given a fairly broad idea of it, is the United States. What other country, for example, would elect an actor to be the president? And Reagan was the president. And he himself even said, I can act this job better than most people can do it. I mean, look at Ronald Reagan's hair there. He was 80 when this picture was taken, and we're told that hair was not dyed and nothing artificial about it. Just this incredibly good-looking man with this wonderful smile, this ability with television. And then, of course, there is another president by the name of Bill Clinton. Also great hair, also wonderful good looks, very intelligent man. And then the rubbish starts coming out. Stuff that you would lose your job for in any other situation. He seduces this intern. He totally lies about it, then gets caught out. He's even threatened with impeachment, and he gets off. And he ends up one of the most popular presidents ever. Why? Because the economy went well under Clinton. And the people were saying, we don't actually mind what's going on behind there. As long as it works, as long as you're successful, we're happy. Then we come to the arrows. The number 3's central sin is deceit. What you see is not necessarily what you get. It's a disaster for them to move in the direction of the number 9, whose sins are moral laziness and comfort, taking the easy route. When a number 3 takes the easy route and does not stick with morality, they become very dangerous. It's much better for them to move in the direction of the 6. The 6's gift is obedience and loyalty. And especially the 6 is good at accepting that there's an authority above myself. 3s tend to be a law unto themselves because they can be. They get away with it because they look and they're so good and it works. And so they tend to be a law to themselves. The gifts of the redeemed 3. The gifts of the redeemed 3 are leadership, and influence. They are what we call charismatic people. I mean that with a small c. They're charismatic people. They draw people to themselves. People follow them. People believe them. And they get things done. They have tremendous influence. America, it is, that had the can-do mentality during the Second World War, and it's a good thing they did, because we ended up winning that war. This can-do mentality, and they could do, and they did, amazing things in a very short period of time. This wonderful gift, and the world needs it. The church needs it. They make wonderful evangelists, and many evangelists are threes, because they draw people, they influence people, they persuade people. And when they're redeemed and they hand that over to God, they are great tools in God's hands. We need leaders. We need people of influence. The world needs it desperately. The most wonderful number 3 outside the Bible that I can think of is American, and his name is, of course, Billy Graham. Billy Graham achieved success very young. They were 30, Billy Graham, Cliff Barrows, and Bev Shea, by the time they realized that this thing was going big. Do you know that those 3 young men, 2 of them in their early 30s, Bev Shea was about 40, the 3 of them sat down in a hotel room, and together they drew up a list of rules for themselves. The rules included, for example, they would never be alone in a city without one of the others with them. And they knew that they could fall. And so they put these hedges around themselves. They also knew that money was a big issue, as it always is with number 3s. So they made a commitment that they would appoint a board. The board would handle the money and would pay them a salary. They even set the level of the salary. Billy Graham was, throughout his life, paid the salary equivalent of the senior pastor of a big church. And that's how they set it. You never saw him flying a private jet and that sort of thing. And they made this commitment to one another in their 30s. Quite remarkable thing. How someone can be so redeemed in their personality by the age of 32. A wonderful thing, but gives everybody great courage. And millions are going to be in heaven because of those 3 men. Down the years, of course, the press have searched and searched and searched to find some mud. And they have come up with nothing. Because here are 3 men of great integrity. And integrity is the great gift of the number 3. Much more than their leadership, because integrity is hard for them. So when you get an integrous 3, you've really got integrity. And so Billy Graham, and it reaps its own rewards. In all 9 of these, if your personality is redeemed, it will reap reward. Jesus said that. And these 3 men have lived to their old age well, healthy, loved. Their family lives have stayed good to the end. Isn't that just tremendous? To see what happens when someone's personality is redeemed. And an example from Scripture. The greatest example of a 3 in Scripture is Solomon in all his glory. We read in 1 Kings chapter 10, Solomon outdid all the kings of the earth in wealth and wisdom, and all the world courted him. Get that? All the world courted him. That's a 3. Just looks great, has this wonderful palace and everything else. And people love it. People fall at your feet. But unfortunately with him, he was not redeemed in his personality. In chapter 11, verse 1, we read, but Solomon was a lover of women and married many foreign wives. Thus he did what was wrong in the sight of the Lord and did not follow the Lord with all his heart. He did not follow the Lord with all his heart. And that is the problem with the 3, is they can appear so good. For a long time, they even do good. The story is told of a man who joined a yacht club. Now, his main interest was not in sailing. The real reason he joined the yacht club was because he wanted to party. And he wanted the best-looking yacht in the yacht club. And so he began to spend a lot of money on upgrading his yacht. And it was beautiful. Had everything you could think of. Gold-plated taps, the works. One or two of the men from the yacht club came to look at his yacht, and they admired it, but then they said, "Are you sure you aren't putting too much weight above the waterline?" But he wasn't interested in that and ignored them. And then he went out one day with a whole group, and they went partying. And while they were out at sea, a storm came up very suddenly, and that yacht turned turtle. And because he had invested so much weight above the waterline, many lives were lost. Now that's a parable of the number 3. They tend to invest a great deal in externals, in how it looks in success, but can ignore what's happening inside them, as it were, below the waterline. And if you are at all driven by success, one of those people to whom image is really important, you need to pay very, very careful attention to what's going on inside, what's happening below the waterline. Now we come to Jesus and the example of Jesus and the way in which he demonstrated the strengths but avoided the weaknesses of the number 3. Such a crowd collected around him that he was not even able to eat. Typical of a 3. Crowds gather, and wherever Jesus went, crowds gathered. I don't think it was only because he was doing miracles. It was because he was just that sort of personality, that people loved him and followed him in great numbers. And a great gift when God gives people like that to the world. But he was not addicted to crowds. That's the secret of the 3. He was not addicted to it. John chapter 6, verse 66. From that time, many withdrew from him and no longer followed him. Now, an unredeemed 3 can't live with that. He'll change in order to get them back. And Jesus changes nothing. He had just talked about his own death and the cost of following him. And from that time, people left. He did not change his message to try to get them back. But he was a great achiever. In John chapter 7, verse 4, I have completed the work that you gave me to do. Throughout his life, a sense of what he had come to do and doing it. And on the cross, his last words were, it is finished. I have achieved that which I was called to do. But perhaps the most striking is that he was willing to be despised and rejected of men. That to a 3 is horrifying, to be despised and rejected. But he accepted it. He wasn't going to change his message or his stance on anything to avoid that humiliation and that rejection. And then we read, when we saw him, there was no beauty that we should desire him. He lost his physical attractiveness and became, in fact, a very ugly spectacle. But he accepted that because he had a bigger task, not just to be good looking, but to achieve what his Father sent him to achieve, the salvation of the world.